Greetings, I'm going to read chapter 17. If you think that I'm not reading quick enough, go to settings and select 1.25. Here he goes. Chapter 17, the astral plane and its inhabitants, spooks, elves, vampires, etc. I can hardly give you a better idea of the course of our journey than by asking you to imagine a vast spiral or corkscrew winding upward and downward in circling rings. A tiny speck no bigger than a pin's head in the middle of a large cartoon might represent the earth. In the center of these circling rings, an equal number of which are above and below the earth, all winding in a connected series from the lowest to the highest around this speck, and the head of the spiral pointing towards our central sun, this being regarded as the highest point of the most advanced sphere. This will give you a faint idea of the earth and its attendant spirit spheres, and help you to understand how in our journey we pass from the second into the lowest sphere, and in doing so pass through the earth plane. As we entered it, I perceived many spirits of mortals hurrying to and fro, just as I had been wont to see them. There is a error here on page 94. WONT. But now for the first time I also saw that mingling with them were many floating spectral shapes similar to those wraiths had been haunting the spirit in the icy cage of the frozen land. These wreaths seemed to be floating to and fro like driftweed upon a seashore, borne here and there by the different astral currents which revolve. So lifelike, till a closer inspection revealed to me that the light of intelligence was wanting in their eye and expressions, and there was a helpless collapsed look about them like wax dolls from which the stuffing has run out. For the life of me, I can think of nothing that will so well express their appearance. In my former wanderings through the earth plane, I had not been conscious of any of these beings, and on asking Hassan of the reason for this, he answered, quote, "First, because you were so much absorbed in your work, and secondly, your powers of sight were not sufficiently developed. Now look," end of the quote. He added, pointing to a strange little group of beings like elves, which were approaching us hand in hand, gamboling like children. Quote, "Look at those. They are the mental and bodily emanations cast off from the minds and bodies of children, which consolidate into these queer, harmless little elementals when brought into contact with any of the great life currents that circle around the earth, and which bear upon their waves the living emanations cast off from men, women, and children. These curious little beings have no real separate intelligence life, such as a soul would give, and they are so evanescent and ethereal, then they take their shapes and change them, as you will observe, like the clouds on a summer sky. See how they are all dissolving and forming again afresh." End of the quote. As I looked, I saw the little the whole little cloud of figures shift into a new form of grotesque likeness, and whereas they had looked like tiny fairies in caps and gowns made from flowers, they now took wings, becoming like a species of half butterflies, half imps, with human bodies, animals' heads, and butterflies' wings. Then, as a fresh, strong wave of magnetism swept over them, lo, they were all broken up and carried away to form other particles. I was experienced in the unreal disappearance that I suppose Hassan read my puzzled state of mind, for he said, quote, "What you have now beheld is only an ethereal form of elemental life, which is not material enough for a long continued existence on the earth plane, and is like the foam of the sea thrown up by the wave motions of pure earthly lives and thoughts. See now how much stronger on the astral plane can be the consistency of that which is not pure." I beheld approaching us a great mass of aerial forms, dark, misshapen, human yet inhuman in appearance. "These," he said, quote, "are the beings which haunt the delirium of the drunkard, which gather around him, drawn by his corrupted magnetism and unable to be repelled by one who has lost the will force needful to protect him from such creatures, which cling like barnacles to him, and like leeches suck his animal vitality with a strange, ghoulish intelligence akin to that of some noisome plant which has fastened itself upon a tree. For such a one as the unfortunate drunkard, the best help which can be given is by obtaining someone upon the earth side of life who possesses a strong will and mesmeric powers, and let him place the drunkard under the protection of his will and the strong influence of his magnetism, till the last of these phantoms drops off, from inability to hold on longer under the stream of healthy magnetism poured upon them, and the unlucky man upon whom they are fastened. The healthy magnetism acts like a poison upon these creatures, and kills them so that they drop off, and their bodies, unable to hold together, decay into immaterial dust. Should these beings, however, not encounter such a strong dose of healthy magnetism, they will go on for years floating about and drawing away the animal vitality of one human endowed with a certain amount of own. At this stage, they can be used by higher, more intelligent beings to carry out such work as their peculiar organizations fit them for. And it is these soulless creatures, thou created and earth nourished, whom a certain class of practitioners of the so-called black magic made use of in some of their experiments, as well as for carrying out their evil designs against any of who had offended them. But like deadly weeds at the bottom of the dark pool, these astrals draw down and destroy in their soulless clutches those who venture to meddle with them, unprotected by the higher powers. End of the quote. Quote, "And now tell me, friend Hassan," said I, quote, "if these astrals, when they fasten upon a drunkard, can or do influence him to drink more, as if the case when the earthbound spirit of a departed drunkard controls one still in the flesh." Quote, "No, these beings do not derive any pleasure from the drink a man swallows, except in so far as by corrupting his magnetism, it makes him such that they can more readily feed upon him. It is his animal or earthly life force they desire. It means existence for them and is much the same as water to a plant, and beyond the fact that by draining the victim of his vitality they cause a sense of exhaustion which makes him fly to stimulants for relief. They do not affect the question of his continuing to drink. They are mere parasites and possess no intelligence of their own, except of so rudimentary a character that they can scarcely give it that name. Quote, to originate a thought or to impress your thoughts upon another requires the possession of an intelligent soul germ or spark of the divine essence, and once this has been given, the being becomes possessed of an independent individuality it can never again lose. It may cast off envelope after envelope, or it may sink into grosser, but once endowed with the soul life it in existing must retain the individuality of its nature and the responsibility of its actions. This is alike true of the human soul and the intelligent soul principle as manifested in the animals or lower types of soul existence. Whenever you see the power to reason and to act upon such reasoning manifested either in man, the highest type, or in animals, the lower type, you may know that the soul exists, and it is only a question of degree of purity of soul essence. We see in man and in the brute creation alike a power of reasoning intelligence differing only in degree. And from this fact, the school of thought to which I belong draws the inference that both alike have a conscious individual immortality, differing, however, in the type and degree of soul essence, animal as well as men having an immortal future for development before them. What are the limits of the action of this law we cannot pretend to say, but we draw our conclusions from the existence in the spirit world of animals as well as men who have alike lived on earth, and both of whom have found on a more advanced state of development than they were in their earthly existences. I'll be right back. Quote, it is impossible for the soulless parasite to influence the mind of any mortal, and it is therefore undoubtedly the souls which have been incarnated in earthly bodies and have so indulged their lower passions in that state that they are not able to free themselves from the fetters of their astral envelopes, that on the earth and inside those yet in the flesh to indulgence in drink and similar vices. They, as you know, can control man in many ways, either partially or completely, and the most common way is for the spirit to partly envelope the man he controls with his spirit body until a link has been formed between them, somewhat animating some twin chips joined to each other and interblended, that all which one feels is felt by the other. In this fashion, that is, what is swallowed by the mortal is enjoyed by the spirit, who controls the unfortunate man, and who urges him to drink as much as possible, and when he can no longer do so, the spirit will then try to free himself and go elsewhere in search of some other weak-willed man or woman of depraved tastes. Not always, however, can either the spirit or the mortal free themselves from the strange link woven between them by the indulgence of their joint desires. After a long continued connection of this sort, it becomes very difficult for them to separate. and the spirit and the man may go on for years sick of each other, yet unable to break the tie without help from the higher powers, who are always ready to assist those who call upon their aid. Should the spirit continue to control man for the purpose of self-gratification, as I have described, he sinks lower and drag his victim down with him into the depths of hell itself, from which they will both have a bitter and weary task to climb, when at last the desire for better things shall awaken. To a soul alone belongs the power to think and to will, and those other soulless creatures but obey the law of attraction and repulsion, which are felt likewise by all the material atoms of which the universe is composed. And even when these astral parasites have, by long feeding upon the vital force of men or women, attained to a certain amount of independent life, they have no intelligence to direct their own or others' movements. They float about like fever germs generated in a foul atmosphere, attracted to one person more readily than to another, and like some germs may be said to possess a very low form of life. Quote, another class of elemental astrals are those of the earth, air, fire, and water, whose bodies are formed from the metal line, or in appearance like the gnomes and mines and mountain caverns, which have never been exposed to the light of day. Such too are the fairies whom men have seen in lonely and secluded places amongst primitive races of men. Such, with the variations caused by the different natures of the elements from which they are formed, are the water sprites and the mermaids of ancient fable, and the spirits of the fire and the spirits of the air. Quote, all these beings possess life, but as yet no soul, for their lives are drawn from a sustained by the lives of earthly man and woman, and they are but reflections of the men amongst whom they dwell. Some of these beings are of a very low order of life, almost like the higher orders of plants, except that they possess an independent power of motion. Others are very lively and full of grotesque unmeaning tricks, with the power of a very rapid flight from place to place. Some are perfectly harmless, while others again are more malignant in their instincts as the human beings from whom their life is drawn, or of a more savage race. These curious earth elementals cannot exist long amongst nations where the more intellectual stage of development has been reached, because then the life germs thrown off by man contain too little of the lower of animal life to sustain them, and they die and their bodies decay into the atmosphere. Thus, as nations advance and grow more spiritual, these lower forms of life die out from the astral plane of that earth sphere, and succeeding generations begin at first to doubt and then to deny that they ever had an existence. Only amongst those ancient religions of the East who have kept still unbroken the threads of record are there to be found accounts of these intermediate dependent races of beings and causes of their existence. Quote, these soulless elementals of hell, of air and water, are a class drawn you as emanating from the debased intelligence of man's mind and the evil actions of his body. how much pages left. There are a lot of, wow, it's a long chapter. Behold now, O man of a western nation, the knowledge which your philosophers and learned men have shut out and locked away as being harmful fable, till man, shut into the narrow bounds of what he can with his physical senses alone see, hear, and feel, has begun to doubt if he has any soul at all, any higher, purer, nobler self than is sustained by the sordid life to earth. See now the multitudinous beings that surround man on every side, and ask yourself if it would not be well that he would have the knowledge which could help to keep him safe from the many pitfalls over which he walks in blind ignorance and unconsciousness of his danger. In the primitive ages of the earth, man was content to look like a child for help and succor to his heavenly Father, and God sent his angels and ministering spirits to protect his earthly children. This is Zoroastrian, right? In these latter ages, man, like a full-grown, troublesome youth, seeks in his self-defeat no higher help than his own, and rushes into danger with his eyes bandaged by his pride and ignorance. He scoffs at those things which is too limited in his powers to understand, and turns aside from those who would instruct him, because he can see his soul cannot weigh it and analyze it. He says, forsooth, that man has no soul, and had better enjoy his earthly life as one who shall someday die and turn to dust again, forever blotted out. Fear of the unknown fate before him, man takes refuge in the vague superstitions, the shallow creeds of those who profess to act as guides upon the pathway of the unknown land, with little more certain knowledge than man has himself. Quote, thus when it is in pity to his wandering, struggling children that God has in their later days opened once more, and wider than ever before, the doors of communication between the two worlds, is sending out again messengers to warn men, ambassadors to tell him of the better day, the true path to the happiness of a higher life, and to show him that knowledge and that power which shall yet be of right is inheritance. As the prophets of old spake, so speak these messengers now. And if they speak with clear voice, with less veiled metaphor, it is because man is no longer in his infancy, and needs now that he should be known the reason and the science upon which his beliefs and hopes must be founded. Quote, listen then unto this voice that calls, Ho, ye toilers of the earth, cried Hassan, turning and stretching out his hands toward a small dark ball that seemed to float far away on the horizon of our sight, a small dark globe that we knew to be the sorrowful planet called Earth. Quote, listen to the voices that call to you, and turn not a deaf ear, and realize here to be too late that God is not a God of the dead, but of the living, for all things are alive forevermore. Life is everywhere and in everything. Even the dull earth and the hard rocks are composed of living germs, each living according to its own degree. The very air we breathe and the boundless ether of universal space are full of life, and there is no one thought we think but lives for good or ill, no one act whose image shall not live to torture or to solace the soul in the days of its release from its earthly form. Life is in all things. End of the quote. Hassan paused. Then in a calmer voice he said to me, "Look yonder. What would you say those things were?" He pointed to what seemed to me at first a mass of spirit forms which came sweeping towards us as though blown by a strong wind. As they came near, I saw they were evidently soulless astral envelopes, but unlike those floating wraiths I had seen haunting the man in the icy cage, these were solid and to my spiritual sight lifelike and full of animal vigor, yet they were like automatons and didn't seem to possess any intelligence. They were drifting and bobbing about like buoys at sea to which boats are anchored, and as they drifted close to us, my friend put forth his will force and captured one, which then remained floating in mid-air. Just a little comment, by the way, Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrians, a very popular singer was Zoroastrian, and he was very proud of it. Guess who it is? It is the singer of the group Queen. He was calling himself Freddie Mercury. That was not his real name, of course. It was his artist name, his pen name. So he was Zoroastrian, and it's a very old religion, as some of you might know. "Now look," said he, "you will observe this is somewhat like a great living doll. It is the result of countless little living germs which man is continually throwing off from his earthly body." Well, I'll get it. Earthly body, emanations solely of his animal or lower life material enough, when brought into contact with the magnetic forces of the astral plane, to form into these limitations of earthly men and women, and immaterial enough to be invisible to man's purely material side of clairvoyant power, would enable degree of clairvoyant power would enable him to see, as you do, that this is not a true spirit envelope, since the soul principle is wanting, and a yet higher degree of clairvoyant power would show that a soul has never been in its form, and that it has never had a conscious existence as a soul's astral envelope. Quote, "Amongst ordinary clairvoyants, the subject of astral spirits is not studied sufficiently to develop these degrees of soul sight. Therefore, few clairvoyants in your earthly country could tell you whether this was a true soul enveloping astral form, or one from which the soul had departed, or yet again one in which the soul had never been present at all. Presently I shall show you an experiment with this astral form, but first observe that being such as it is flesh and full of the animal life of the earth plane, and has not the collapsed appearance of those you saw before, which had once contained a soul, and which were there in a state of rapid decay yet. And mark this carefully, this flesh-looking astral will decay far faster than the others, for therefore it has none of the higher principle of life clinging to it, which in the case of an astral that has once contained the soul, often remains for a long time animating and keeping it from perfect decay. Astral forms must draw their life from a higher source, between parentheses from soul germs, in fact, end of the parenthesis, or they soon cease to exist and crumble away. But, I ask, how do we assume the shape of man and woman? Quote, by the action of the spiritualized magnetic currents which flow through all the ether space continually as the currents flow in the sea. These magnetic life currents are of a more etherealized degree than those known to scientific mortals, being in fact their spiritual counterpart, and of human atoms acts upon the freezing moisture upon a window pane, forming them into the resemblance of men and women, as the electricity forms the freezing moisture into a likeness of trees, plants, etc. Quote, it is an acknowledged fact that electricity is an active agent in the formation of the shapes of trees, leaves, etc. in vegetable life, but few know that this refined form of magnetism has a similar share in the formation of human forms and animal life. I say animal life as applied in those types which are lower than man. End of the quote. Quote, are there then also the astral forms of animals? End of the quote. Certainly, and very queer, grotesque combinations some of them are. I cannot show them to you now, because your powers of sight are not yet fully developed, and also because we are traveling too rapidly to enable me to develop them for you. But someday I shall show you these, as well as many other curious things relating to the astral plane. I may tell you that atoms may be classed under different heads, and that each class will have a special attraction for others of its own kind. Thus vegetable atoms will be attracted together to form astral trees and plants, while animal atoms will form into the resemblance of beasts, birds, etc., and human atoms into men and women's forms. In some cases, where the human beings from whom the atoms come are very low in the scale of humanity and nearly akin to animals, their atoms will blend to those of the lower forms of life and create grotesque, horrible creatures which resemble at once animals and men, and having been seen by clairvoyance in a semi-trance condition, as described as nightmare visions. In the earth spheres, an immense amount of these living atoms are thrown off continually from man's lower or animal life, and these sustain and renew the astral forms. But were we to transport one of these shells to a planet whose spheres have been spiritualized beyond the stage of material life, or in other forms freed from all these lower germs, the astrals could not exist. They wouldn't be blown away. These astrals being, as I have said, created from the cloud masses of human atoms, and never having been the envelope of any soul, are very little more permanent in their nature than the frost flowers on a window pane, unless the power of some higher intelligence acts upon them to intensify their vitality and prolong their existence. I'm going to stop here now. I'm going on for now 36 minutes. I'm going to stop here now. I'm going on for now 36 minutes. I don't want the video to be too long. So this is page, starting on the page 104. I started from page 94, so 10 pages, and I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages to go. So I will make another audio. Thank you for listening, and I don't care if a lot of people or nobody is listening to this, because I read it for myself as well, and I know there are things that I know about learning that I won't explain here because mainly nobody cares. So anyways, there it is. Bye.